faithfully delivering value, exploring great books worldwide. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're diving into the book Detroit Past. The subtitle is The Decline of the Motor City. Today, the traditional industrial areas in the northeastern U.S. are called the Rust Belt, where countless factories shut down, leaving abandoned plants and rusty equipment everywhere. Sally's Book Talk once covered a book, Hellbilly Elegy, which explored the lives of people at the bottom of the Rust Belt. Today's book focuses on a famous city in the Rust Belt, Detroit, America's former motor city. Detroit is a key port in the northeastern U.S., with convenient shipping and thriving manufacturing. In the early 20th century, it drew in America's three biggest car companies, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler. By the 1930s, the Big Three had practically monopolized the entire U.S. market. For the next 70 years, Detroit remained the hub of the American auto industry and a powerhouse of the world's car manufacturing. But from 2005 to 2009, in just 5 years, Detroit's auto industry plummeted from its peak. General Motors went from being the world's top automaker to bankruptcy. Ford dropped from second to fifth globally, and Chrysler got bought by Italy's Fiat. So what exactly happened during those 5 years? Why did Detroit collapse so suddenly? This book will give you the answers. The author, Bill Vlasic, previously wrote Taken for a Ride, the inside story of the Daimler-Benz and Chrysler merger. He's long covered the auto industry for the Detroit News and Newsweek. Vlasic has close ties to key figures in the book, so he uncovers secrets behind Detroit's downfall. Next, I'll break down Detroit Past into 3 parts for you. First, what caused the decline of the Big Three? Second, what rescue plans did the Big Three try? Third, why did only Ford barely make it? First, let's start with part 1, the reasons for the Big Three's decline. To sum up, there are 3, and the first is the impact from Japanese and Korean car makers. As crude oil prices kept rising, consumers increasingly favored the fuel-efficient models from Japanese and Korean automakers. Way before the 1970s, oil prices were generally low, at around 30 cents per gallon, converted to renminbi. What's that mean?
That's about 50 cents per gallon, roughly 1/10 of China's current oil prices.
Therefore, the American middle class preferred driving big, gas-guzzling cars and living in large suburban homes. General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the Big Three, mostly produced large displacement vehicles to meet market demand, and these dominated the vast majority of the auto market share. The 1970s oil crisis reversed the long-term slump in crude oil prices, with costs quickly rising to about $1 per gallon. By the 21st century, oil prices broke the $2 barrier, and sales of fuel-efficient Japanese and Korean models surged, gradually eroding the Big Three's market space. By 2004, Toyota had surpassed Ford in sales, becoming the second largest automaker after General Motors. In August 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the southern U.S. coast. Oil refineries in the area shut down, prices spiked to $3, and GM's September sales dropped by 24%. Ford fell by 20%, while Toyota and Honda's fuel-efficient models hit record sales, capturing exactly the market share the Big Three lost. The second reason for the Big Three's decline was that profits were squeezed by high worker benefits, leaving inadequate funds for new tech R&D. The Big Three's benefit costs mainly fall into 3 categories. First is high-wage positions. American workers hired by the Big Three earned up to $26 per hour. In stark contrast, American workers at Japanese plants earned only half the Big Three's hourly wage. The second category is healthcare. In the U.S., the Big Three had to cover retired workers' medical insurance themselves. Each company spent up to $10 billion annually. In 2005, the Big Three proposed spending tens of billions to buy out retired workers' healthcare in one go. They wouldn't be responsible anymore, but the union demanded hundreds of billions from each to set up a healthcare fund far exceeding their capacity. And the third category is job security. Detroit auto workers didn't fear unemployment. Per labor contracts, laid-off workers received benefits from the Big Three at no less than 95% of their original pay until rehired. Plus, companies couldn't force them to work beyond 50 miles away, so many collected over $50,000 in benefits for years straight. Take General Motors as an example. They spend up to $1 billion annually on unemployment benefits for workers. Why are the wages and benefits so high for Detroit auto workers?
This is because they have a powerful union organization, an industrial union which had up to 1.5 million registered workers at its peak.
In 1935, the U.S. passed the National Labor Relations Act, legally granting industrial unions the right to represent workers in negotiations with employers. Well then, I respect. Industrial unions leveraged their monopoly power to significantly push up wages for unionized workers. For instance, in Alabama, union plumbers earned nearly 2/3 more than non-union plumbers. So for the Big Three, the union was extremely difficult to deal with. Could they hire non-union workers like Japanese and Korean automakers? No, they couldn't. The auto union negotiated a labor contract with the Big Three every 4 years, which specified the required proportion of union workers to be hired. Thus, worker benefits severely undermined the competitiveness of the Big Three. As Steve Miller, CEO of Delphi, GM's largest parts supplier, once said, "If you buy a Hyundai, you can choose to add a satellite radio. But if you buy a Chevrolet, benefit costs come as standard equipment." The third reason for the Big Three's decline was conservative management, complacent, stuck competing in large vehicles, and slow to pivot to fuel-efficient R&D. And in 2005, design at GM was dominated by Vice Chairman Bob Lutz, who was over 70 and obsessed with large cars, severely blocking fuel-efficient tech development. And publicly, Lutz argued large vehicles were essential for GM for two reasons. First, to prove GM still dominated that core market. Second, to maintain direct competition with Toyota and Ford, especially since Toyota was launching large vehicles like the Tundra pickup, challenging the Big Three's turf.
And he firmly believed rising oil prices' impact was temporary.
He claimed, "This effect will fade over time. People will eventually get used to $3 per gallon gas." Just like when prices hit $2, people protested but adapted, and Ford was no better. In 2005, CEO Bill Ford brought in Mark Fields, 42, from Europe to lead marketing for new models. Fields believed only developing new fuel-efficient models could improve company performance, but other executives opposed it, like CFO Leclerc, who fiercely criticized developing. Fields felt he spent too much on new product development. Executive disagreements delayed Ford's fuel-efficient launches, while Chrysler's management was too chaotic to focus on new models. Chrysler Corporation was founded in 1925 and once ranked as America's third largest automaker. In 1998, Chrysler merged with Daimler-Benz, and its entire management got replaced by Germans. The Germans saw worker benefits as a bottomless pit and constantly tried to reduce them. By 2007, after failed attempts, the Germans sold Chrysler to Cerberus Capital Management, a private equity firm mainly interested in auto financing. After Cerberus took over, the appointed management had no auto manufacturing experience, unable to steer Chrysler out of crisis. Among Detroit's Big Three, GM's management had another flaw. They could sideline the board. This traces to GM's history. In 1908, founder William Durant merged Buick with other automakers through stock swaps, creating General Motors. Later, GM gradually absorbed brands like Cadillac and Chevrolet. As mergers increased, GM shares dispersed widely. As a public company with fragmented ownership, CEOs easily manipulated board votes to consolidate power. For example, CEO Rick Wagoner often bundled contentious proposals with confidence votes, threatening mass resignation to paralyze the company unless the board complied. Usually, board members compromised with Wagoner to avoid chaos. When management overpowers the board, decisions prioritize job security over company future. For instance, In 2006, GM missed merging with Renault-Nissan, which would have shared fuel-efficient tech and small car platforms. The scale effect could have saved GM $10 billion yearly. But Renault-Nissan's condition was leading the integration themselves. CEO Wagoner, fearing for his job, manipulated board votes. Directors unanimously halted merger talks. That wraps part one. Simply put, the Big Three's decline had three shared causes: Japanese or Korean automakers' impact, union benefits eating profits, and conservative, complacent management. Next, part two. The Big Three's survival plans. Facing similar issues, their approaches aligned. Three main tactics. First, price cuts.
When sales dropped, their first instinct was slashing prices. In early 2005, GM sparked a price war. Ford and Chrysler followed.
Through 2006, using employee discounts and cash rebates, GM sold 9 million cars in North America, clearing inventory, but lost $1 billion. This further gutted R&D funding. Their second tactic, mergers. The Big Three blamed overcapacity for cutthroat competition. The market couldn't sustain three giants, but merging would ease the pain. Chrysler, smallest of the three, first considered merging. Until Q2 26, Chrysler still turned profits in North America. Despite profitability, Chrysler's German CEO, Zecchi, saw the crisis early. To him, U.S. unions were too powerful. In Germany, automakers like Daimler, VW, and BMW negotiated too, but worker benefits were just discounted luxury cars.
In 2003, 5 years after Daimler-Chrysler merged, Zecchi plotted with GM's Wagoner and Ford's Bill Ford to confront unions and cut wages and benefits.
The plan: one company would confront the union on benefits directly. Say Chrysler goes first. If unions struck, the other two would fund Chrysler until they surrendered. But Bill Ford disagreed with Zecchi's aggressive approach, so the alliance never formed. That's when Zecchi started considering selling Chrysler. And
when Q3 2006 projected a $1.05 loss, ending 2 profitable years, Zecchi planned Chrysler's sale.
The Germans only cared if Chrysler profited Daimler and prevented crises from spreading.
In 2006, Zecchi approached GM, who offered just 10% equity for Chrysler, demanding union healthcare buyouts first, killing the deal. 2 years later, GM pushed to merge with Ford, but Bill Ford flat out refused.
Reasons: GM wanted control, unthinkable for Ford's family steward, and merger meant job cuts, angering unions. The Big Three's third survival tactic: seek government aid. The 2008 financial crisis became the final blow for GM and Chrysler. With frozen credit markets, they begged for a $25 billion government loan as last resort. But at congressional hearings, executives offered no real reforms. Just old layoff plans, silent on pay cuts.
Worse, ABC News caught their private jets parked at D.C. airports.
Executives preached sacrifice while arriving on luxury jets, sparking public outrage.
The 25B loan died. With cash gone, only bankruptcy remained for GM and Chrysler.
That concludes part two. We covered the Big Three's survival plans: price cuts, mergers, and government bailouts. All failed. Setting up next topic, only Ford barely survived. How did Ford manage it? That brings us to part three.
Founded in 1903, Henry Ford revolutionized manufacturing by replacing handcrafting with assembly lines, slashing costs and prices.
Ford's groundbreaking Model T made cars affordable for average families, cementing Ford as the second largest automaker after GM. By the late 20th century, Ford owned luxury brands like Aston Martin, Jaguar, and Land Rover. In 2004, Toyota snatched Ford's #2 global ranking. So why didn't Ford collapse like GM? Three main reasons. First, ownership structure. Since its founding, the Ford family has tightly controlled the company. With 40% voting power, the family could push reforms or fire management anytime. Since becoming CEO and chairman in 2001, Bill Ford reshuffled executives multiple times. No risk of management overpowering the board like at GM. In 2006, seeing conventional fixes fail, Bill Ford made a crucial decision. That October, Bill stepped back as chairman and hired Boeing's Alan Mulally as CEO. Second reason: Mullally's bold reforms. At 61, Mullally had spent 37 years at Boeing. Now, he started as an engineer, mastering aerospace, but had zero auto industry experience. Addressing skeptics, he explained, planes need 4 million parts, cars just 10,000. I'm confident. He then immersed himself in learning. Working 5 a.m. to midnight, he devoured auto industry books and structured his thoughts daily. Mullally's reforms included empowering newcomers and smashing bureaucracy. For example, October 2006, hydraulic failures halted production of Ford's new fuel-efficient Edge SUV. The new car launch has been hindered. Fields, in charge of operations, was just transferred from the European market and has shaky footing. He had two options. One, release cars that function normally to restart production, then fix issues during manufacturing. Two, delay the model's launch. After consulting his team, he decided not to release any cars until the problem was solved. At the next day's business meeting, Fields presented the launch plan with a big red dot showing the Ford Edge launch was paused. Ford executives, used to bureaucracy, always avoided bad news. Suddenly, the room fell silent. Everyone awaited Mullally's reaction. Mullally turned to Fields, stood, and applauded. "Thank you, I appreciate your honesty." Meeting room atmosphere instantly became lively. Someone actually dared to self-mark red and wasn't criticized. Suddenly, everyone spoke freely. The quality head said they'd faced similar issues before and could offer solutions. The procurement head evaluated parts for the Edge, while manufacturing execs pledged to send more engineers to the plant. Within 2 weeks, Field's red mark turned yellow. 3 weeks later, the Edge launch plan was finally greenlit and officially started. The second aspect of Mullally's reforms was setting clearer strategic goals. Though Ford proposed a vague strategic goal in early 2005 called Way Forward, but Mullally introduced a clearer one upon taking office. One Ford. In Mullally's view, Ford's complex product lines didn't create economies of scale and added unnecessary costs. For example, brands under Ford like Aston Martin, Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda couldn't share parts. Even the same model used different parts across global factories. For instance, parts for the Focus made in North America differed from Europe's. The One Ford strategy demanded standardizing parts across models. Mullally set specific targets. By 2012, 70% of Ford's total production would be on a few platforms, consolidating volume to boost parts purchasing and dilute design and manufacturing costs. For luxury brands that can't be integrated, the best way is to find a good buyer. In March 2008, Ford sold the Land Rover and Jaguar brands to India's Tata Group for $2.03.
Ford not only shed its burden but also got a good price, while Tata gained brand value. A win-win deal.
The third reason Ford survived was stronger cash flow. In early 2006, Ford had $25 billion in cash on hand, $5 billion more than the larger GM. At the end of 2006, when Mullally took over, he planned to use cash to buy out retired workers' health care. But thanks to Ford's good relations with the union, they agreed to accept stock instead of cash, saving Ford a fortune. Just think, GM spent $30 billion in cash on healthcare buyouts.
Then, Wall Street added icing on the cake. Major banks agreed to provide Ford with a $23.05 credit line. And for months,
Mullally immediately decided to take it all, knowing there were many expenses ahead for factory restructuring and developing fuel-efficient tech. Of course, Mullally needed the Ford board's approval to borrow. With the Ford family holding 40% voting power, their consent was practically guaranteed. For this, Mullally lobbied with one condition: the Ford family temporarily giving up annual dividends worth hundreds of millions. Mullally explained the stakes. Temporarily foregoing dividends to secure cash could get Ford back on track. Otherwise, bankruptcy would make their shares worthless. 02. Ultimately, the Ford family sided with Mullally in the board vote. In hindsight, it was the ample funding for fuel-efficient tech and factory restructuring that barely kept Ford alive. By late 2008, when the U.S. government bailed out Detroit, GM and Chrysler requested tens of billions in loans, while Ford only asked for a symbolic $9 billion credit line to signal its cash reserves. This move distanced Ford from the other two giants, and capital markets reacted.
Investors voted confidence in Ford, tripling its stock price, and consumers favored Ford, drawing supporters from GM and Chrysler.
This brings us to the end of Detroit's story. On June 1st, 2009, General Motors filed for bankruptcy. This 101-year-old company had collapsed. The U.S. government spent $30 billion on GM's bankruptcy restructuring, becoming majority hardholder with 60% of the new GM. Pontiac, GM's gas-guzzling brand, was permanently shuttered, ending management's golden era. CEO Wagoner was fired, with over a quarter of executives forced to resign or retire.
Today's GM isn't the century-old titan. Its 40B market cap is a fraction of Tesla's 100B as an emerging automaker.
Though Ford survived under Mullally, it never regained its number 2 automaker position. In fuel-efficient tech, Toyota has far outpaced Ford. By 2019, Ford's sales were just over half of Toyota's. In June 2009, Cerberus sold Chrysler to an Italian automaker. The Big Three era ended. Auto manufacturing was Detroit's backbone. Each factory job created 5 service jobs: parts suppliers, gas stations, diners, stores. Production hubs even had their own schools and hospitals, forming self-contained communities. Generations worked as auto laborers, living middle-class lives while witnessing coworkers' birthdays, family milestones, graduations, funerals. But the industry's decline changed everything. Retirees lost security. Countless lost jobs and couldn't pay mortgages. $60,000 Detroit homes sold for $1 by banks. Workers fled, tax revenue crashed, services collapsed. The city decayed. The city couldn't even afford streetlight repairs. Rising unemployment and police shortages spiked crime. Detroit became America's murder capital, averaging 2 daily shootings, accelerating exodus. Only after a decade did Detroit begin slow recovery. In 2018, Ford announced investments to renovate Central Station, while GM and Chrysler also ramped up investments in Detroit. Whether Detroit can rise from its decline remains to be seen. Well, that's Detroit Past. That concludes our reading of this book. Find notes below the audio. See you next time.